Should we ignore these artifacts because they have been irreversibly separated from their original surroundings? But diffusionists like to point to one artifact that has been dismissed by mainstream archaeologists, even though it was found using modern methods within the original surroundings.
They can't say that about the Bat Creek stone because the Bat Creek stone was found in the course of an official excavation by the Smithsonian Institution. Okay, then Bat Creek stone went to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. They didn't understand it. They thought it was Cherokee since it came from Cherokee country. They did not realize it was Hebrew. And they published it upside down, and then they threw it in a box in the sub-basement of the Smithsonian. And ever after, it was poo-pooed until some Semitic scholars like Cyrus Gordon came and vindicated it.
Cyrus Gordon, who was one of the great Semitic scholars of our generation, he talks about the writings that were found in this very area and how he was able to translate those things, translate that writing. When it was turned over, they were trying to figure out what type of Native American wrote this, and Cyrus Gordon turned it upside down. He recognized that it was actually Phoenician.
Phoenician, this older form of Hebrew, dates to the Old Testament Babylonian captivity and the scattering of Israel. Are there other linguistic evidences that may lend support to diffusionist ideas?
As a scholar of ancient languages, I have discovered that there are many symbols in the Micmac that are very close and similar to those of ancient Egyptian. About 700 BC in Egypt, there was a language that was developed or came in that was called Meroitic from the kingdom of Meroe, which many Egyptian scholars have even called Reformed Egyptian because it's so different than what the standard Egyptian that we know. And this Meroitic is very close to some of the signs of the Micmac.
Anthropologists dismiss a lot of the stone evidence and inscriptions in these ancient languages like Egyptian and Greek and Hebrew by saying, well, they were not found in the course of an official excavation.
Are these diffusionist ideas simply a continuation of the controversies that existed in John Wesley Powell's day?
There were some people who were arguing that the mounds had not been built by any of the existing groups of North American Indians, and they would use the word race indiscriminately. There were others who did argue that no, these were non-Indian peoples in a biological sense and that they were built by Europeans.
Perhaps DNA science can settle once and for all the biological question of who, for example, the Hopewell mound builders were.
We can use DNA to help us reconstruct the past and the history of different populations because your DNA is passed down from your parents from generation to generation. There are certain types of DNA in particular that are very useful for reconstructing population prehistory. Your mitochondrial DNA is DNA that every person has, and you inherit it from your mother. Your mother passes it on to her children. Men don't pass it on to their children. And this type of DNA, therefore, gives us a measure of matrilineal relatedness. I collected DNA from and analyzed DNA from a couple of different Hopewell cemetery populations. When we looked at DNA from these two different Hopewell populations from Illinois and Ohio, we found that there were 5 primary mitochondrial DNA lineages present. These lineages have become designated by letter names in the scientific world, and the ones that we see in Native American populations, both living today and in these Hopewell cemeteries, were the mitochondrial lineages A, B, C, D, and X. And these 5 lineages are ones that are common today in Native Americans, and they were the ones that were present in these ancient Hopewell communities. When we look at the distribution of haplogroup X in the Americas, we see that it's present in about 3% of all Native Americans, but it's more common in some populations. In particular, peoples who live in the upper Great Plains exhibit much higher frequencies of haplogroup X, sometimes up to 25 or 30 or even 50% in some samples that have been studied. This research, the genetic research that we've done, really conclusively proves that the same mitochondrial lineages are present in ancient Hopewell burial populations as we see in contemporary Native American populations. And that very clearly establishes the relationship between these contemporary Native American populations and the ancient Hopewell.
DNA science apparently settles the biological questions of who these ancient advanced Hopewell mound builders were. But where else is this DNA found? And where did it originate?
The form of haplogroup X that's present in the Americas is known as haplogroup X2A. And this specific type is defined by a number of additional mutations that Native Americans who belong to haplogroup X share. This particular form of haplogroup X is not found in Europe. In fact, it's not found, as far as we know at this point in time, anywhere in Europe or Asia. But in particular, there's no recent connection to Europe and to European individuals who possess haplogroup X. The only similarities that we see are similarities that stem from much more distant, much more ancient ancestry that probably dates back 30,000, 40,000 years, perhaps somewhere in the Near East. And so what most likely happened is that this very ancient common ancestor of individuals who belong to haplogroup X had descendants who split and went two different directions. Probably some of these individuals moved to Europe, others moved towards Asia and up towards Beringia. And it appears that this Asian form of haplogroup X is what eventually made its way into the Americas. There have been some recent studies that have suggested that this particular distribution of haplogroup X in the Americas is most consistent with a migration from Asia through the Bering Strait over the land bridge and then down through the ice-free corridor. And so if individuals with haplogroup X migrated through that ice-free corridor, they would have first entered the continental United States and continental North America in the upper Great Plains, and it would make sense then that we would see the highest frequency of haplogroup X today in populations in that region.
Most mainstream archaeologists and historians would probably agree that this assessment is something of a contemporary final word on Native American origins. So does DNA science put much of diffusionist theory to rest? Diffusionists would answer no. The reason? There's a lot about DNA evidence that is a controversy.
I'm Cherokee Indian, and so I had a moral imperative to investigate my own family history and origins, and that led me to DNA. I was a professor at that time in Georgia, and with my research partner, Dr. Elizabeth Hirschman, we became interested in the mystery of our people. Haplogroup X is really a fascinating story because the X-Files of Native American genetics, because it burst on the scene in 1998. Scientists didn't want to believe it, but they found a new haplogroup in addition to A, B, C, D among the Indians of the Great Lakes in particular. And that was haplogroup X. And so immediately the scientists who have a kind of idée fixe, in my opinion, set about trying to find haplogroup X in Mongolia and Siberia, because of course all American Indians, all upstanding American Indians came across the Bering Land Bridge chasing woolly mammoths, right? So they weren't able to find haplogroup X in Siberia. They found one case of it. That wasn't enough. Haplogroup X was a Eurasian type. So then they started talking about, oh, well, maybe they got here by jumping across the ice in a circumpolar fashion. Okay. Well, it kind of rested there for a while. As it turned, and last year, finally, the mystery of haplogroup X was revealed in a very important study by a team under Dr. Schluss, and he determined without any doubt that the origin of haplogroup X was the hills of Galilee. It was that clear. That's where, because where you have the greatest concentration and the greatest diversity, you have, that's the origin.
There's no controversy among DNA experts about the Middle Eastern origin of haplogroup X. The only question really is, when did it arrive in the Americas?
Most projections about ancient human history, prehistory really, are based on a mathematical and statistical model called phylogenetics.
What we find in the journals is that it is commonly thought among DNA experts that there was an outmigration of haplogroup X from the Middle East about 40,000 years ago.
That's a pure projection. You know, it's a mathematical progression going back to there based on how mitochondrial DNA mutates. Is it true? Who knows?
But what most people don't realize is that among these same experts in these same journals, there is controversy about the dating.
So, you know, I think these are projections.
The controversy is between those who assume a theory that man branched from chimps 5 to 6 million years ago versus those who are using newer actual findings from DNA pedigree studies. The theoretical dating gives much longer time frames, but the actual data shows a 20-fold reduction and would place the Middle Eastern outmigration of haplogroup X about 2,000 years ago, plus or minus.
Is it true that all Native Americans came from 10 families that stumbled across the Bering Strait chasing woolly mammoths before the last ice age? I don't think mine did.
Whether or not ancestors of Native Americans originally came from Asia over the ancient land bridge, or whether or not they had interactions with other parts of the world, one thing is clear: much of their archaeological record is now gone.
It is unfortunate there was such an opportunity there, and I don't think that people consciously were trying to destroy things or ignore things. I think that for me this was a case where, you know, expansion was the thing on everyone's mind and moving forward.
Victims of science and of the doctrine of manifest destiny, 19th century Native Americans were labeled as savages, and this helped to legitimize their suppression, subordination, and the taking of their lands.
The idea that manifest destiny trumped all is certainly, as far as I have been able to read, absolutely true.
I understand that these early scientists were in the kind of products of their time, in that that's what people were talking about and that's what they were saying, and so they believed that yes, in fact, you know, Native people are savages who we can clearly see that. That's what they were thinking.
Disregard of their value resulted in the wanton destruction of thousands of artifacts and grand architectural achievements, and aided in erasing knowledge of their advanced capabilities from our collective memories. While scholars may disagree on the interpretation of remaining evidences, These remaining archaeological evidences may be keys to eventually recovering and more fully appreciating the buried history and culture of these ancient, lost civilizations.
I think it's important that we pay attention to the achievements of our predecessors. We may respect our predecessors a little more if we do. We certainly will respect our own responsibilities a little more if we look at the evidence that over the preceding 9,000 to 10,000 years, there have been several other periods in which, I'm assuming, proud people did proud things in the landscape and in cities. So there are important things for us to learn.